On April 30th, 2020, a notice was sent to both the Asbury Park Press and the Star Ledger that this meeting would be held remotely using communication equipment due to COVID-19 restrictions. In addition to the live feed on YouTube, this meeting is being videotaped for possible future broadcast on Howell Township TV 77. Now you're going to have to unmute everybody. One second. allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you. Do we have the approval of minutes?
We have no minutes this evening.
Any vouchers?
We have no vouchers.
Correspondence?
I have no correspondence.
Resolutions?
No resolutions.
Okay. All right. First is up is our submission waiver. We've got case number SP-1018A, Joseph Bosio Holdings LLC.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Todd Cohen. I represent the applicant, Joseph Fazio Holdings, LLC. We're here for a submission waiver hearing. I had the opportunity to speak to your engineer, Laura, yesterday regarding the waivers, and I believe she's ready to make a recommendation regarding them.
Ron, can you swear Laura in?
Okay. Laura, do you swear or affirm the testimony you have to give this board is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. Okay, so if I could, Mr. Chairman, we had issued a March 26, 2024 report. The submission waivers are specifically item 4, A through G. And given the minor nature of this application, it's an amended application. They were before some time ago. It's amended just to put some bins in. I don't really feel any of these are applicable at this point, and I take no exception to the granting of the waivers for the purposes of deeming this application complete.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ms. Newman. Does anybody on the board have any recommendations or comments?
Oh, hold on, Brian, because you're all muted. 1 second.
I'll make the motion to approve the submission waiver. Okay. Okay, and
I'll say whatever.
Unmute everybody. I have Rob Nicastro made a motion. I don't know who seconded. Dave Everett? Dave Everett, you made the second?
yes.
Thank you. I'm gonna mute everybody and call you one at a time. Mike Bozick. Mike Bozick? Mike Bozick?
Hello?
Mike, we have a motion and a second to grant submission waivers to Fazio Holdings. How do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you.
Certainly slows things up.
Paul Dorado?
Yes.
Chief Kudrick? Chief Kudrick? I can't get him. Rob Nicastro. Rob Nicastro?
Yes.
Dave Everett?
Yes.
Brian Tannenhouse.
It is a yes for me, but Eileen, I want to let you know, I believe Mr. Seaman has joined us.
Rob Seaman, you're there?
I see him on the screen.
Okay, I have you, Rob. Were you here for the entire hearing on Joseph Fazio Holdings? So how do you vote?
Just before the pledge. Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Anybody here? You got me now?
I do.
Good, perfect, all right. Yes, that's a yes for me.
Thank you.
All right, we're gonna mute everybody and then take the chairman off. Just give us a second.
Brian, do you want to call the second case?
Yes, I will. The next case for a submission waiver is case number SP-1072, One Industrial Court LLC.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, it's Todd Cohen again, representing the applicant, One Industrial Court LLC. Again, these are submission waivers that I did speak to Laura about, and I believe she's prepared to make a recommendation.
Ms. Newman?
I have been sworn in.
Okay, do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give this board is the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
I do. So, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, we have a report dated March 25th, 2020. Item 3 specifically outlines the checklist submission waivers.
It's rocky, but it's going
As
surprisingly
relates
well.
to item D, that is not applicable because this is not a conditional use within the zone. And as it relates to E and C,
Double check
given
the
this
feed,
was
I'll come back.
initially part of a plan for commercial development, and it is on septic as well, and should there be any easements required as part of the approval, they would provide those at that time. So for those reasons, I take no exception to the granting of those 3 waivers for the purposes of deeming this application complete.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody from the board have a comment? Or a motion? I'll make the motion.
That was Rob. Do we have a second?
Chief, for second.
I have a motion by Rob Castro, a second by Chief Kudrick. Mike Bozovic,
Yes.
Paul Dorado,
Yes.
Chief Kudrick,
Yes.
Rob Castro,
Yep.
Rob Seaman,
Yes.
Dave Everett,
Yes.
and Chairman Tannenhouse.
Getting sound.
We're not getting sound in there at all. Like YouTube, no sound, recording, no sound. I know.
Mr. Chairman, I second that motion.
That's Rob Stevens, second.
Roll call, please, Larry.
I need to know who made the second motion.
Mr. Stevens.
Thank you. Mike Bozovich,
Yes.
Alderado,
Yes.
Chief Goodrich,
Yes.
Rob Castro,
Yes.
Rob Stevens,
Yes.
Dave Everett, and Chairman Tannenhouse.
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can we just take a short break for a minute? We're having technical difficulties here, and then we'll come right back.
Yes.
Thank you. The planning board is about to reconvene, so if everyone would please come back to the meeting. We'll have everybody muted, and we'll have the chairman call the next case.
Okay.
Oh.
Thank you, Eileen. We'll call the next case. The next case is case number SD-2989, Roland and Ann Willowy. The minor subdivision.
Yeah.
Counselor?
And we'll talk.
Represent Roland and Ann Roland, and this property is located on Merrick Road. And what I've said about it from the beginning is that it's a relatively simple case where we're readjusting one lot. One lot is 1 acre, and the other lot is 3 acres. And we're going to turn them into two conforming 2-acre plus lots. Ann's maiden name is Merrick, and this whole location is still somewhat rural. And I have with me tonight Walt Hopkins, is our engineer, to go through any details you're interested in. I don't know if you need Walter's qualifications.
Sure, please.
Hi, Mr. Chief. First, sure. Yes.
We can't hear.
Hold on one second.
I can say I do.
Go ahead.
Confirm the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth? Yes, I do. Please state name for the record. Walter Hopkins, Hopkin. Walt, have you ever appeared in Howell before?
Yes, I have had the pleasure of testifying before Howell Township. I'm a licensed professional engineer in the states of New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and Maryland. I'm also a licensed professional planner in the state of New Jersey.
Could you give the board just one or two other locations where you've been accepted as an expert?
Sure, locally in Jackson and Lakewood.
Don't move that over yet. I have to mark it.
We will, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, could you just keep it simple?
Sure, yeah, just a brief overview. Mr. Galvin, a good broad brush there. It is a 4.1 acre site. It's on the east side of Merrick Road, between Tall Oaks Court and Tudor Drive. It's known as Block 177. Currently, there are two lots there. They're lot 99 and 99.01. They are located in your ARE2 zone. All the surrounding uses are rural and single-family residential in nature. There are single-family subdivisions off of Merrick Road to the north and to the south. This is a rural area. There is no sidewalk along Merrick Road for its entirety. All of Merrick Road has no sidewalk on it whatsoever. The property is currently vacant. One lot is 3.19 acres, the other is 1.02. Other than the 1.02 acre lot, they are totally in conformance with your bulk requirements. And what's being proposed is to bring them totally in compliance, so that the lot will be 2.04 and 2.17 acres. We're also proposing to dedicate 5 feet of right-of-way along the frontage, so the township will have the opportunity to have their desired their desired hat width along the frontage. At this time, there's no proposed improvements or development. The lots are just being made to be in compliance, presumably for sale for somebody else. We've agreed to and would accept a stipulation that once these lots were developed once they were perfected, if somebody were to develop them, that they would come back for individual grading plans on each lot. We had met with your professionals at a TRC, actually just before the COVID crisis, and I've reviewed their letters to comply with all suggestions and requirements.
Walt, did you want me to put up that aerial that you sent in?
Please.
Right. We're going to mark that as Exhibit A5 then, because that wasn't into evidence before.
This is just to assist the board with understanding our location.
So this is Exhibit A5. I have been to the site, and I do believe that these are Google Earth images that accurately reflect the surrounding properties. Where the red drop dot there is the property, and you can see the long rectangle of scrub and trees. That's the subject property. This just kind of orients you to the rural nature of the property, and then below this is actually a street view, which also gives you a view from the street, the rural nature, and of course the lack of sidewalks.
And so we would ask for a waiver of the sidewalk requirement, or whatever, at least an alternative, either take a waiver or host resources.
We do have exemptions from both Monmouth County and Freehold stores on file. That's all I have.
Okay.
Take questions from the board member.
Roland and Ann are with us, but I don't really want to put them forward under all these circumstances unless you feel you have questions for them.
Unmute all the board members.
Mr. Gutierrez, is this one of those, excuse me guys, for 1 second. Right, I'm in a meeting. You have to go. Sorry guys.
No, it's okay, Dad.
That little guy is home. Okay, Mr. Gutierrez, is this one of those instances where the sidewalk fund comes into play?
It may be. So to the extent the sidewalk fund is applicable, they will have to make a financial contribution.
And that's not our determination, that's the town's determination.
Well, if you grant them the relief and say no sidewalk, then the precise dollar amount is calculated by the town. We don't do that here.
Okay, very much. I appreciate that.
You know, our thought tonight was, whichever way is less expensive, we want to head in that direction.
Well, that's not a planning rationale for the board. You know, so I mean, either you ask us that you want relief or you don't.
Yeah.
Okay.
Does anybody on the board have any comments? Any of our professionals have any comments?
Mr. Chair, I just have a question, and it's either for Mr. Hopkin or for Laura. Does the RSIS require sidewalk, and if it does, you need a de minimis exception from that?
Hey, Ron? Can we have one anyway? Whether we need it or not?
If you want to say to the extent one may be necessary, yeah, we could do that.
I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for thinking of that.
So if I could, Mr. Chairperson, for the January 31st, 2020, as the applicant had indicated, this is 2 existing lots, and they're taking them into conformity with the zoning regulations. The only thing I would add, in item 5 of our report, and that the application complies with those.
I'm sorry,
Item 5, there's a couple of technical comments. That's all I have.
Thank you, Ms. Newman. Sherry, anything? Okay. And does the board have any comments or questions? Seeing none, we'll open it up to the public portion of the meeting.
Going to unmute everybody.
Have any comments, please?
Hello, I have a comment.
Okay.
Hello?
Please identify yourself.
We heard that we have one comment. Can that person identify themselves?
Did someone have a comment on that application?
Hi, my name is Lisa Mack.
Okay. Can we try to unmute everybody but the people that have
I think she's on the phone. You know what? Maybe mute everybody but
All right,
that.
I'm going to mute everybody except a couple people. Hang on.
Hold on, please. We're going to mute everybody again so we can hear this person. Is this Eva? Hello? No, she's the traffic expert. Is this Eva?
This is Lisa Dowd.
Lisa Dowd, go ahead, please.
Hi, I live at 93 Merrick Road. I live directly behind the property in question.
Okay.
So my one comment is regarding the sidewalk. We do not have any sidewalks on Merrick Road at all, and we would like to keep it that way. So I would appreciate whatever waiver has to be granted to make sure that that stays the way it is. Everyone on the street would appreciate it. Two, the other thing is we have, I believe, one street light on Merrick Road, and we don't want to add any more. So if there's some type of waiver that needs to be addressed for that, we would like to keep our road as rural as we possibly can.
Do you have any further comments?
I do. Well, the property that's being divided is right across from preserved farmland, and almost everyone on our street has farmland type property except for the few exceptions that are offshoots off of Merrick Road. But almost all the residents on Merrick Road have some type of rural property. So we would like to do whatever we can to keep our road as rural as we can maintain it as close to what it is right now. So we want to avoid any sidewalks being added to our road and any additional streetlights.
Okay, any other further comments or questions from anyone? Or from you, Ms. Dowd?
Comment I have is I really didn't appreciate the surveyors trespassing on my property when they were doing the surveys for this property.
Anything else?
Nope, those are all my comments.
Thank you. I'm going to,
Put you on mute, and Brian, you are off mute.
and I think you can put Dennis Galvin back on. And Walt
Okay,
Hopkin.
thank you.
And Walt Hopkin.
I have no comment.
I don't know if Dennis or Walt or anyone wants to address Ms. Dowd's comments.
No, we're not going to. We agree with her.
Anyone else from the public have anything to say?
I'm going to unmute everybody in just 1 second, and anybody else can let us know.
Any other members of the public that would like to comment on this application?
Eileen, we have another comment from the public.
We do? Do we have any other comments from the public? I don't hear any other comments from the public, Brian.
I heard somebody say something.
Is there any other member of the public that wants to make a comment on this application? Please speak up. That's for Brian. Brian, I don't hear anything.
That being said, we'll close the public portion
Just leave the board members.
and open it up to the board for final comments. Mr. Galvin, do you have any further comments?
Chairman, I think this is a relatively straightforward case. We all felt it was just a lot.
Okay. Okay, are we saving up to mute everybody and then unmute only the board members?
Yes, please give us 1 moment to do so.
Yes, just a second. Okay, all the board members have been unmuted. All the board members have been unmuted.
Thank you. Okay, does anybody in the audience have any further comments? Or do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve SB 2989 with the waiver of the sidewalks.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second that, yeah, and I also make a motion to remove any type of sidewalk trust funds, since there is absolutely no need for a sidewalk on an entire length of.
Well, that's not within our jurisdiction, that's required by the ordinance.
So it's required that they pay that sidewalk fund, even though we're not granting sidewalks?
If it's applicable, yes.
Well, how do we know if it's applicable?
And we make a note that we recommend no fee be charged? Can we just make that recommendation?
If you want, I mean, it's not. Yes,
Benefits applicable, what do they mean?
ordinance says if you don't put a sidewalk in when you're required to, there's a contribution.
Okay, so that's a mandate.
Yeah. It's supposed to make it easy for the developers, for situations like this, but it's supposed to help the township to also create a sidewalk network.
Yeah, but it also creates a burden on our residents also for an unnecessary fee. So it could be avoided. So we could have that part of the recommendation.
We're not the council, we don't adopt the ordinance.
Yeah, well, I recognize that. But can we actually put that in a resolution of our recommendation?
Yes, you can.
Okay, so that can be, so that's, I'll make a motion as stated.
So is that Rob Nicastro made the motion? Who did the second?
Yes, I'll concur with that, with his comment, and make that part of the motion.
So who made the motion?
I made the motion, Chief seconded.
Thank you. Yeah. Mike Bozovic?
Yes.
Paul Dorado? Paul Dorado? Is he on?
Paul wasn't unmuted. You still
Hear me now?
Yes.
I vote yes.
Thank you. Chief Kudrick?
Yes.
Mr. Nicastro?
Yes.
Mr. Seaman?
Yes.
Mr. Everett?
Yes.
Chairman Tannenhouse?
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you.
Have a good day.
All right, we're going to put everybody on mute for a minute, except for the chairman. Thank you. Probably going to have to unmute him, too.
Okay. Eileen, if you could please unmute Mr. Cucchiaro.
I did. Hold on 1 second till it... Ron, you're unmuted as well, because Brian has to leave the meeting at this point. He's going to recuse himself. But we have no alternate chairperson, so I guess we have to appoint one?
Well, we'll have to elect one. So, with that being said, and this has to be one of the Class 4 members. So, Eileen, who are the Class 4 members who are here tonight?
Mr. Seaman and Mr. Bozovic. The chief is a Class 2. Oh, Rob Nicastro, Rob Seaman, or Mike Bozovic.
Okay, so I need a motion.
All right, hold on, because they're all muted, so 1 second.
Okay.
Unmute all of them. Okay, Ron, they're all unmuted, so you can address the board.
Okay, so I need a motion to elect a temporary chairperson. One of the three individuals that Eileen just mentioned are the eligible members. So is there a motion?
The eligible members are Mike Bozovic, Rob Nicastro, or Robert Seaman.
I mean, I would make a motion to nominate Mr. Nicastro to be the temporary chairman, given his far lengthy experience, and myself or Mr. Bozovic.
I would say. Okay. Is there a second?
Yes, Mr. Bozovic seconds.
Okay, so Eileen, if you could just take a roll call?
Sure. Mr. Bozovic?
Yes.
Mr. Dorado?
Yes.
Chief Kudrick?
Yes.
Mr. Nicastro? Mr. Seaman?
Yes.
Mr. Everett?
Yes.
And Chairman Tannenhouse.
Yeah.
Motion carries.
Chairman Nicastro, it's all yours.
All right, everyone, have a good night. Thank you, Eileen, for putting this together.
Thank you, Brian.
Okay, the next case is SB 1041A Smith Family Property. Eileen, you don't want to read the description, do you?
Don't have to. No, thank you.
Okay, is council on?
Hold on 1 second. Jason Fitcher. Okay, the attorney for Smith Family is Frank Accusano, and he is now unmuted.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, can you hear me? I'm going to be a disembodied voice this evening. My computer is not sending a picture. Can you hear me?
We hear you, Frank.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, Frank Accusano, appearing on behalf of Smith Family Properties. We're here, this is a subsequent hearing. I want to present this evening the three witnesses that we presented the last time we met. Jason Fitcher, Anthony Scalise, and Betsy Dolan, to go over briefly the changes and adjustments that we've made to the plans based on the comments and suggestions that we heard at the last meeting. For purposes of economy, if they can hear me, they've all been sworn, and I would simply ask them to affirm once they're called that they're still under oath to save Ron the trouble of having to swear them in again. So my first witness would be Jason Fitcher, our engineer.
Jason, you're already unmuted.
Yep, I'm unmuted. And to Frank's point, yes, I understand I'm still under oath.
Thank you.
Okay, so I guess I'll just hop right in then? You good?
Please
Okay. All right, so during our February hearing, you requested that we address a few items, so we revised the plans, we resubmitted them to you. That was back in March, and what I'll do now is I'll just walk you through the changes that we made. So the first one was we changed the site access. We had originally two two-way driveways. Now we have two one-way driveways. So the driveway on the north would be ingress only, and the driveway on the south would be egress only.
Hold on, Jason. Would you like me to put up the site plan?
Yes, that would be great. Thank
Do
you.
you know what page?
That one right there.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yep. There you go. So you can see the top being north, that's our ingress drive. The bottom being south, that's our egress drive. So the discussion at the last hearing was about space for trucks to maneuver in and out of the site. So that's what we've accomplished by doing the two one-way drives. And we're also hoping to prevent conflict with other vehicles going the opposite direction in each of the driveways. Now, because of the change, we only have one site triangle that we have to analyze, and that's from the southern driveway or the egress driveway. And since it's a county road, the Monmouth County Planning Board is going to have us apply their standards to the site triangle. So as I was digging into the plan for tonight's hearing, I noticed that we have a measurement that's off on our plans related to the split triangle. What the county is going to want to see is the split triangle is 15 feet back from the edge of pavement of the county road. What we show is a bit further than that. So when we make that adjustment, the tip of the site triangle into the site, if you will basically be right on the right-of-way line. So when we do that, when we make that change, what's going to happen is we will not have an encroachment onto the adjacent property, lot 6. So that's an improvement. And we're going to address that in our county submission, which is imminent, and we're going to abide in the lower review. But for purposes of tonight, I can confidently say that we have safe and adequate site distance in accordance with the county standard on that driveway. Next thing we did is we provided a detailed parking chart for each of the uses that are permitted in the SED zone. We discussed at the first hearing that the applicant is seeking approval for flex space. The future tenants may vary by use and the amount of space that they occupy. What we are seeking your approval for is to permit all future tenants as long as, number one, they're permitted use, and number two, they have to prove adequate parking on site for all uses, including their own new use. So the chart that we provided on the plan shows various permitted uses along with those parking requirements. And we show it in two ways. The first way is by ordinance. Now, this is the standard that a future tenant is going to be held to. The second one is by ITE standards. And we provided this one as a reference because it's the industry's gold standard for parking demand. But again, a future tenant will be held to the ordinance requirement. ITE is just for reference. What you're going to notice is the parking demand for office warehouse only differs by 6 spaces when you compare the ordinance versus the ITE standard. So they're close. The ITE standard is lower, which is typical. The ITE standards are typically lower, usually by a bit more than 6 spaces. But in this case, I thought it was interesting to point out how close they are. So I provided a lot of testimony at the first hearing about parking and uses, and just to refresh your memory a bit, not to go through all of it, but Cliff Note style, your ordinance doesn't have a parking standard for flex space. So I described that we analyzed parking by various standards to evaluate the most conservative, which I anticipated would have been your preference. They were your shopping center standard, which came out to 174 spaces required, office and warehouse, which came out to 112 spaces required, so adding the 2 uses together, and then looking at the ITE standard, which came out to 71 spaces required. And then our traffic engineer, after I was up, came up and testified to several other methods of calculation from the ITE manual based on various different uses that are related to what's proposed, and they yielded different but similar numbers. Now, after discussing with you at the first hearing, we decided that we would lock into your standard for office and warehouse and adding the 2 together. So when we apply your standards to the updated architectural plans, we get a parking demand of 123 spaces, whereas we're proposing 170. The traffic engineer submitted documents to you with a theoretical mix of uses to demonstrate the parking demand of a more intense mix of uses. And the result of that analysis is 164 parking spaces are required, again, where we're proposing 170. So the nature of flex space is just that, it's to remain flexible. So we're demonstrating to you that the parking that's being provided is able to accommodate that wide mix of future tenants. Now, if you'd be more comfortable, this came up at the last hearing and discussion, if you'd be comfortable, we'd be happy to provide required parking for the office plus warehouse mix and then bank the remaining spaces. And that would result in 47 banked spaces. Now, I know the applicant prefers to build all 170 right away, but again, if that's your preference, he'd be happy to accommodate if you prefer to bank some spaces initially. The next thing we discussed at the hearing was refuse. We had initially proposed 2 refuse areas, and we discussed how we anticipate future users would handle their refuse in with the overhead doors on the south side of the building allowing for private refuse collection. You wanted to see more refuse areas, so we revised the plans and we now have a total of 5 refuse areas, so we have 3 additional. We also had discussion at the last hearing about providing more buffering along lot 8.02 to our north. So the revised plans demonstrate enhanced buffering in this area in a few ways. The first is, yep, you're zooming in on it there. It's the property along the road to the north of us. So what we've done with the revised plans to enhance that buffering is we're showing a 6-foot board-on-board fence along the property line. And of course, once we get into the front yard, we drop the fence down to 4 feet high, which is the way it was before. But now we have the board-on-board fence extending back to enhance that buffer. We're also proposing shade trees between that fence and our curb. So what'll happen is the fence will provide visual buffering down low, and then the trees will provide visual buffering up high. Third thing we're doing on these plans, there's another sheet, the landscape sheet, it'll show up.
You know what sheet number that is, Jason?
Yep, I'm looking right now. Oh, there we go. It's PDF number 10, or sheet C, you probably saw the PDF number, C600.
I think we have it on there now.
Yep, so what you'll notice is on the adjacent lot for our north, same one we're talking about, we're showing an existing mature tree line on neighbor's property. I don't have it at my fingertips, but I believe a picture was submitted to at the last hearing showing what that, or between the last hearing and now, showing what that mature tree line looks like. But I can tell you, having driven out there and looked at it, it's substantial, it's evergreen, it's quite a buffer. And then the fourth thing that we're showing for the enhanced buffering is the existing accessory building that's on that property. We did not have it on the plan previously. We don't have it surveyed. We got it from an aerial. It's not to survey accuracy, but it is very, very close to size and location, what we're showing here. And you're going to notice that its size, I want to say it's about 190 feet long, and the orientation of it with 190 feet facing us provides a substantial visual buffer between the uses. Now, the principal structure on lot 8.02 is further up the peak, so that accessory building that we're showing does provide quite a buffer. Next thing we talked about at the last hearing was about some trees, and we've since had a conversation or two with Ms. Farrell, your tree expert, and what we did is we varied the species of shade trees that are around the perimeter of the development. There was a comment at the last hearing about the use of the emerald green arborvitae buffering the refuge areas and the concern was about deer resistance. So we swapped those out as well, still an evergreen green, but a deer resistant type plant. We also provided Ms. Newman with some lighting level calculations, which we believe indicate safe and appropriate lighting levels throughout the site. And lastly, we coordinated with the architect to match building square footage on the site plan. There was a couple of comments in the review letters asking about this. And what we noticed when we went through it is it's a victim of iterations and changes that happen between the site plan and the architectural plan. So what we have is the 3 new buildings that are proposed are each 45,500 square feet. So the square footage for the entire site with all 4 buildings, so that's the 3 new ones plus the existing building, is 148,550 square feet. Now those tweaks are internal only, the building footprints never changed, no variances are created, and in terms of the office space and warehouse mix, we're still within that 20% office space that we talked about all along, which is the standard for flex space type use. So beyond those items, my testimony from the first hearing stands, but I'll make a quick note that since the first hearing, we received a review letter from the Township Fire Bureau, and they had a statement in there that says, quote, no objection to the proposed use of the property as designed. They did have some minor technical comments, which we're happy to accommodate. We can make those changes very easily. They're not going to change the site design in any way, just some technical items for them. And we also received a review letter from the Monmouth County Board of Health with no objection to the project. That's all I have for direct, unless there's any questions.
Hold on 1 second and we'll unmute everyone.
Okay.
Jason, if I may, I don't interrupt the board, but I want to stress again, and I should have at the outset, is that we are seeking preliminary site plan approval for the whole site, but final only for the front section, phase one. It is a phased development. Joe, you might want to confirm that.
Yes, that's true. That's what we presented this hearing, and there is a sheet in the plan set if they want to review it again. Basically, the existing building is already there, obviously, and what we're proposing to do is construct building one, which is closest to the street first, and we will construct a road around, basically, around the back of the existing building. It's in the location of the future roadway, so it's an easy extension for phase two to construct the back two buildings and the rest of the building.
That's all I have, Mr. Chairman. Opens up to the board for questions.
Sure. Any member of the board have a question for this witness?
No.
Okay, I do. So I think let's go one step at a time. There's some variances that are listed on this, and I think it's going to depend on the parking, right? Whether we bank or not, the variance for the.
No, the variances that we had, and I went through detailed testimony in the first hearing about that. They're all related to the buffer in one form or another. The parking is compliant. We actually have more parking than is required. The discussion I was having about the banking is at the first hearing, some board members said, why are you putting in more parking than you need now? If you need them in the future, build them then, but if you don't need them now, don't build them yet. So the applicant's preference is to build all of the parking spaces at one time, but if the board's preference is to limit the number of spaces to the anticipated tenants initially, the applicant would do that. And again, we don't necessarily know who the initial tenants are anyway. That's the the development.
If I could, Jason, though, the parking is currently located in the buffer.
Yeah, all the variances are related to the buffer. That's correct.
But I think what the chairman was saying, Victor, was that the nature of the buffer variance is caused by where you've placed the parking. I think that's what he was saying. Not that you didn't have the requisite number of parking spaces, but that to get to that number, it required a variance from the buffer requirement.
That's correct.
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. The discussion, without getting into the testimony from last time, the discussion we had was the constraints that are placed on the site. You got, from memory, I want to say about 22% of the site in the rear that's just taken away from development because of environmental constraints. You have a large site at 10 acres, but it's only about 300 feet wide. So, you know, meeting the intent of the master plan and ordinance about utilizing the properties in the SED zone, providing for development that's in close proximity to you know, Route 195 and the county road, it presented some challenges. So that's how we, in my eyes, that's how we got pinched on the buffer. We also have to consider that we are in the SED zone, and the buffer issue comes from the fact that we have residential properties on either side of us, so those are non-conforming uses, and we have a large property, whereas they have smaller properties. And what I was suggesting at the first hearing is that I don't think it would be the best planning alternative to develop this property around some legacy residences that are in the area. So if I put it in a nutshell, hopefully that helps.
Well, I think, but those are reasons that you're giving to support the grant of relief. You know, I think, though, what you're saying is that you agree with the chairman that the nature of the relief, which is all he was saying, is that there's parking in the buffer. I mean, you agree with that. It's just those are your reasons why you think the applicant is entitled to the relief.
Sure. Yes.
Okay, let's get the let's knock this one out. So let's get the board's decision whether they want to bank these spots, because that would relieve the variance at this time. And to be honest with you,
it wouldn't really relieve it, because when the time comes, you would be still granting the variance. It would just be delayed in when it would happen.
That's correct.
Or unless it was the board's desire to get preliminary and they would have to come back. And the fact remains that we don't really know who the tenants are. So those spots may not be necessary, and it might be a moot point. So I think the issue should be at first, do we want to grant this variance, or do we want to bank the parking, and then the variance will have to be addressed possibly at another time?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, the banking of the parking spaces has nothing to do with the grant of the variance, because you still wind up long-term, if everything goes according to the plans that we've submitted, with parking in the buffer area. So, to repeat Mr. Fisher's testimony, we have no problem banking if that's the determination, but the variance is really a separate issue.
If I could, though, that's not accurate. I brought this up at the last meeting. As was testified to, 123 spaces are required for an office warehouse mix, yet you're proposing 170 parking spaces. So we have, I think, over 50 spaces in excess of what is required. The issue is that you're trying to park your site for every single use without knowing those tenants and have a buffer infringement as a.
That's correct.
If I may, just to add to that a little bit.
It wouldn't be that you banking the spaces. I think that's where you're talking about as an option, where we approve the number of spaces that are necessary for this phase of the project, and they would have to come back, which is not the total number of parking. It's I'd have to look back at something far less that would not have to go into the buffer, and then they would have to come back at phase 2 and then address the parking, but not to grant variance for unknown uses in phase 2 until we know what they are.
But if I could just add one thing to that, banking those parking spaces is not really going to solve, it's not really going to eliminate a variance because it's the parking spaces in the drive aisle.
Nobody's doing it.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Parking does not eliminate the variance.
Okay, good. You got a little choppy and there was a technical glitch there. I didn't quite catch that.
What I'm saying is banking, you're absolutely correct. When you bank the parking spaces, you're still approving them. So it would still require a variance. I'm saying to avoid the variance, which is where the chairman was inquiring about, there would be no banked spaces, and it would just be the spaces associated with the uses that you know at this point. And then when you come back, there would be an analysis of the park based upon the actual, that you're proposing at that time. So I think and I'm not saying the board's going to go this way, but to answer the chairman's question, to avoid a variance at this stage, there would be no banking, there would just be enough parking to comply with the requirements for the uses, I guess.
Well, so let me just clarify that then. I understand what you're saying now. Thank you for explaining. If those parking spaces are eliminated now, and you're saying it would eliminate the variance, what I'm saying is variance would not be eliminated because what's not allowed is the parking in the drive aisle. The drive aisle would still be there, so the variance would remain, even if those parking spaces were not built or approved.
So, even if 23.
I'm sorry?
You're allowed to get access.
Right, but the requirement is a 50-foot buffer, and you're not allowed to have parking or drive aisles in that area. So if the parking was taken out, the drive aisle would still require the variance.
But if it's just a drive aisle, though, it wouldn't be the same intensity of a variance with only the 123 parking spaces versus the 170, right?
It would be reduced a little bit, but the variance would still be required, yeah.
I understand that, but what would be the difference in intensity so that the board understands?
What would be the difference in intensity?
There's supposed to be 50 foot. It's just a drive aisle and not the parking. What your request now, I think, is what is it, like 6 feet or something?
right?
Well, just so to be clear, I just want to state what our ordinance states. Access points from public roadways and utility infrastructure, as well as fences, along the rear property lines, as the case may be, shall be excluded, from the buffer requirement. So when you keep saying the access aisle provides, the thing, that's the access from the roadway, correct?
It's the drive aisle around the development. So in 188-226B, commercial parking spaces and/or associated driveways shall be located a minimum of 50 feet from any side or rear property line with the buffer residential use.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I think the fact still remains that the variance request that we've made is still active. We need the variance relief because we're assuming that eventually the whole thing gets built out. And we'd ask the board to get the variance relief based on what Jason has told you, reserving, however, the board's right or choice for us to bank some of those spaces so they're not built currently. But I repeat, I think that the variance is still in play.
Ron, you opined, are you standing by what you said?
Someone speaking, I can't hear him.
Eileen, is Ron on?
Is Ron on?
Just give it 1 second. Ron dropped out for some reason, so let's just give him a minute to log back in.
Okay.
Can you guys hear me again?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you, Ron.
Okay. I thought you guys would have been done by now. So I guess, Laura, before I lost my connection there, I was asking on the section that Mr. Fichter identified, 80-226B, says commercial parking spaces and or associated driveways. Associated driveways, how do you interpret that? Is that not an access drive, but something that's more direct located for the parking?
That's how I interpret it. You got the driveway to the parking place. I don't understand.
Was it because you felt that there was an exemption?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
I was asking Laura because she felt that there was an exemption.
I think there's a conflicting section of the ordinance. I'll defer to her on that.
Okay. I'm just trying to drill down on that so we can resolve that.
It might be 63D. I'm just double checking. I think that's where she was reading from.
That's correct. So it would appear that they conflict. I think that the point of the issue is, even aside from that, you still have 47 extra parking spaces, and the idea is if they're not really necessary or we don't know what the use is, they are putting a further infringement in. The board could waive the access aisle. We could talk about the conflicting sections. I do know the the ordinance does allow for an access driveway in. The fact that this continues and becomes your through drive, I mean, that happens on both sides of your property, correct?
Yes,
But the parking is on the other side, and the parking is how far off the property line?
6 feet. So, another thing here, and Frank, I don't know if you want to jump in on this, but, Laura, you just mentioned in your testimony that, I forget the exact words you used, but we don't need the additional parking. The testimony that we gave at the initial hearing was, we're trying to make a successful site reflect space for a variety of uses. If an initial user comes in, and it's the one everybody is looking for, that's great. If a future user comes in, maybe sooner than they expected, and they're permitted use and there isn't enough parking to build more, we don't want to turn that user away. We want to make this site a success. So the more users we're able to accommodate within your ordinance, the better. So when you talk about not needing parking, I just wanted to clarify that in our minds, we do need the parking to create a successful site in the long term.
Yeah. Can I make a comment? Is our board packaging in?
Go ahead, please.
Okay. Well, I'm just a little still confused about, I understand on the plan there's a list of permitted uses, but it doesn't identify all the permitted uses in the zone. And, it only identifies a parking ratio for a warehouse and office. So who's supposed to make the determination in the future as far as when the uses aren't actually known for the site, that the parking does comply and the circulation is acceptable? Does the applicant come back before the board, or is this limited to warehouse office now? So, that's the question that needs to be answered in order to determine whether or not you come with parking is to be constructed now or later.
So, to talk about, first of all, the parking chart that's on the plan, what we were thinking, and reiterating again from the first hearing, what we were thinking is when a future user comes in, before they can occupy the site, they're going to have to go to the zoning officer. The zoning officer is obviously going to check to make sure that the use is permitted. That's number one. And then number two, we're going to make sure that there's adequate parking on the site. So that's why we included this chart on the plan. We're only showing square footages for office and warehouse because that's how the application is being submitted initially. If a future user was to come in, and I'm just picking one off the list here, let's say financial institution, right about in the middle of the list there, they're going to have to provide one parking space for every 250 square feet of building. So we've kind of laid it out ahead of time here for a future user and the zoning officer to check it. We're memorializing what the requirements are in the hopes of helping the zoning officer at that time.
But what about like a fitness center or like a microbrewery or a solar energy facility? I don't know if you have, you do have a solar energy facility, but that's not on there. But I doubt that's going to happen here. But something like a microbrewery and a health club facility or fitness center, those are very strongly, likely to, go into possibly into this site, with the large open space. There is no parking standard for that in the code book. How is that to be addressed? Does that go back before the board?
Well, I guess if there's no standard and it can't be calculated, I guess we're going to rely on the zoning officer at that time. If the zoning officer finds a standard that meets the town's requirements, that's fine. Otherwise, yeah, they're going to have to come to the board and present what their parking requirement is, and you'll be able to make that decision at that time.
Yeah. Well, I will point out the code in the parking section for the code. I guess you could say the closest thing to it in the code for parking for a fitness center would be gym, and that clearly states that it's to be determined at a time of site plan. I'm not sure we can defer that to the zoning officer. And I'm not even sure if the board is comfortable, and Ron, maybe you can help me, or Laura, if that's a normal practice, is to defer to, that type of gym. Ron, is that you? You're not coming through.
Sorry. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. you can't delegate that type of authority to the zoning officer because it involves something that is within the board's jurisdiction. The zoning officer, he can apply a defined standard, not, make one up.
Eileen, Frank is asking that he be unmuted.
Hold on 1 second.
Thank you.
We're getting a lot of feedback from Frank's line, that's why we are being selective of muted, but he's being unmuted now.
Okay, I'd appreciate it if you'd leave me unmuted while his testimony goes on.
We're getting a lot of
feedback.
feedback from you, Frank. That's why we keep muting you.
Oh, you're getting feedback?
Yes.
Let me see.
You're unmuted now.
Hello?
Got you, Frank.
Frank, you can go ahead.
Yes, can you hear me? I see I'm unmuted.
Yes, Frank, we hear you.
All right, to the point that was just raised, I understand that if a zoning officer doesn't have a standard to apply, he's not going to be able, or she is not going to be able to make an intelligent decision about an application. What I propose is this. If we come up with a user for which there is no standard, then we agree we'll have to come back to the board with reference to IT, perhaps with reference to the parking regulations in other municipalities, to establish what is an appropriate number. And I understand what the lack of standards would do in that regard. But we offer to do that, and we believe that would solve the problem. Jim, I guess that's really a question for you.
Not really. The approving procedure is really beyond me. I'm just saying that, right now, it's pretty much proven on the plan that there's sufficient parking for warehouse and office. Depending on the combination of different uses out there, whether or not there's sufficient parking is not known at the time because the uses aren't known based on the significant number of permitted uses in the zone. I think it's up to, council's advice on what the law allows and what the board's comfortable with as far as who makes a determination as once the uses are known, that the site is suitable with not only just parking, but also with circulation and loading.
There's going to be testimony coming up, which I think is going to answer some of those questions you just raised about mix of uses, parking requirements, circulation, and all that. Our traffic engineers will get into that. So maybe at a later point, those questions will be answered for you.
Yes.
Okay.
Defer.
And Jason, why are you still on? I just had one. Did you get a report of May 1st, 2020?
Which report?
The traffic review of May 1st.
I did, yes.
Because when you started off, you talked about site distance, and we did have some comments about site distance. I understand it's a county road, but as a board, we still are responsible to make sure it's safe access. So are you going to be able to provide us a plan with addressing our site distance comments? Most notably, showing the full legs of each leg of the site triangle down the full length of the road with the actual existing geometry. And, we noticed that there's some existing potential landscaping or significant trees or other obstacles within actual right-of-way that, might fall in the triangle. So you're going to be able to address all that?
Yeah, so what we're going to do is we're going to put the county site triangle on the plan, and just as you and all that stuff. And we'll address that with the county at that time. And if there's obstructions within their right-of-way, we'll bring that up with them and work with them on trying to get that resolved.
I understand, but at this board level, we're going to be able to need to be comfortable as well. So, at what point can we see a plan that shows the full site triangle and that it's, it's safe?
No, we can put that together very quickly. We can put that into you right away. And again, what you're going to see is it's all in the right of way. It's nothing on the adjacent property. The geometry of the road is favorable. It doesn't bend backwards, so we have to feed across anybody else's property. So I'm confident it's going to work just fine, and we're happy to put that together and turn it right around to you.
Okay, yeah, just because I did know that south of the site, the road does continue to curve in a westerly direction, and I feel like the one leg is maybe a little bit to the left. I might push the line further into the adjacent properties, but if you move the vortex point closer to the road, that might work. And there are existing features within the right of way that may obstruct sight distance. So we'll need to pick that up. We want to see those on the plan. So. Okay. Just real quick, there was other site plan related comments about bollards, spot grades, and topo on the accessible routes and locations of the handicap ramps and handicap spaces. Did you have a chance to review those yet?
I did. I'm happy with those items that you just mentioned. That's all fine.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, Pete.
Hi. Just 2 points real quick. I just wanted to mention that with regard to the buffer variance, I think uses in the to the proofs for the variance being removed.
Pete,
can everybody hear me okay?
You're breaking up.
I'm breaking up. All right, let me repeat that. So the combination of uses and the overall development intensity ties back to the justifications, the proofs for the variance, buffer variance. So I think the clearer you could be about the types of uses, especially as far as that phase 1 building is concerned, I think that would be helpful because ultimately the parking spaces that are creating the majority of the need for the variance are not necessary based on the office and warehousing uses. So I think more information is needed in that regard. And just for clarification, that accessory building, it does provide a significant visual buffer, but that single family residence is closer to the roadway than that building. So while it does provide a buffer visually for part of the site, there's a significant portion, especially the ingress egress on that side, that is still visually able to be seen. And I just wanted to put this on.
Yeah, so the residence next door, you're right, it is closer to the road than the accessory building. So what they'll be able to see is building number 1. What they won't be able to see is the rest of the development because of that accessory building. But recall also, we now have a 6-foot tall solid fence with trees above that, so there will be, and you have that existing substantial evergreen buffer, which is very tall in that area. So maybe they won't see anything at all. But if they do see a bit of the development, it'll be minimal. In terms of the uses, we did hit, and the proofs and potential future uses, we did hit on that a bit last month. And what the discussion was, and these were questions from the board, do we anticipate that a future user would potentially do something outside? And the answer is no. Anything that would happen there will happen internally. If for no other reason, there's no space to do anything externally. So the parking spaces and the buffer, I don't think that the proofs change at all. What I provided last time, I think is the same, because what will happen is if those parking spaces were constructed, somebody would come in, park in the space, the neighbor wouldn't see it because of all the buffering. They'd exit their car, they'd go into a building, and at that point they're gone to the neighbor, right? And they come out. Whether it's 1 car an hour or 10 cars an hour, I don't think it's going to make a difference to that neighbor in terms of buffering. So I would stand on my testimony from last month. And again, I mentioned this earlier too, but for the ball on the end, what we're trying to do is develop this property in accordance with the master plan and the ordinance. This property is a golden opportunity to do just that. What I suggested we avoid is developing this property around some legacy residences that are in the SED zone. I don't think that would be the best planning alternative. So hopefully that all ties it together for you and substantiates those proofs.
Okay, you have anything else, Jason?
I'm done, thank you.
Okay. Any members of the board have any questions for Jason?
Mr. Chairman,
Hold on, Rob, I have to unmute them. Okay, they're all unmuted now.
Any board member have any questions for Jason? I guess not. Okay. Frank, you have another witness. You have your traffic expert, because I think that's going to tie into your offer of a solution for this variance.
Yes, all right. I'll call as my next witness Betsy Dolan, our traffic expert, who similarly was sworn at the last meeting. I'd asked her to confirm that and then present her testimony, which I hope will answer the board's questions. Betsy.
Betsy, before you start, Frank, do you have a raise hand feature on your computer?
I'm sorry, Eileen, say that again?
On your menu, do you have a raise your hand feature? Because we're getting feedback from you, so I have to keep muting you.
No, I don't think so. Listen, I'm still getting used to color television over here, so...
Okay, well, if you need to, just give us a minute after your witnesses are done and we'll unmute you. But we have to mute you for their testimony, okay?
Yeah, that's okay. All right,
Thank you.
Okay, so this is Betsy Dolan, and I was sworn at the, I believe it was the February meeting, and I understand I remain sworn. At the last hearing, I presented some testimony regarding the traffic characteristics of the development, and I was asked if I had prepared a report, and I indicated that at the county's request I had prepared a traffic statement, and the board asked me to submit that. I provided a traffic impact statement dated April 6, 2020, that was submitted. It was updated to incorporate some discussion on parking, because that was not something that the county was interested in. So that statement was submitted, and it gave an overview of peak hour trip generation on a typical weekday for different uses. Table 1 on page 3 of that report had a range of morning and evening peak hour trips ranging between 42 total driveway movements and 98. And then on page 4, Table 2 provided a theoretical mixed-use development scenario that incorporated a bank, some medical office, health or fitness club, and warehousing. And I indicated in that discussion that later in the report, there was an evaluation of this being a realistic mix of uses for the site, because it would meet the ordinance parking requirement. With this higher mixed-use development, we would get a higher trip generation in excess of 100 peak hour trips in the morning and up to 300 trips in the evening peak hour. And then the final portion of that report went through the ordinance requirements for mixed-use development and indicated that any mixed use or different changes of non-industrial type or warehouse type uses would be bound by the ordinance requirement and subject to a parking analysis. CME, Mr. Winkowski, issued a May 1, 2020 letter that commented on the trip generation and parking and some of the site plan. There was dialogue just a few minutes ago between him and Jason. But the biggest thing for me to address in the May 1 CME letter was a formal analysis of the driveways, as well as the adjacent intersection to the south at Allaire Road. We had been able, fortunately, to obtain a traffic study done for a medical office at that intersection, and so we used the traffic volumes and projections and reprojected using data collected by dynamic traffic for that office application. And we performed a series of driveway analyses for the highest, I'll say, industrial or warehouse type development, as well as for our theoretical mixed-use development. We calculated acceptable levels of service at the site driveways without any excessive queuing and likely not warranting any type of left turn lane. And then similarly, we ran the analysis for the intersection to the south with Allaire Road, the signalized intersection, and showed that there would be no change between the no build and build conditions with the addition of site-generated traffic from either development type, whether it be strictly, an office, warehouse, industrial use, or the theoretical mixed use that was identified in our original report dated April 6th. Oh, and I should say that the formal analysis was submitted in a letter from our office dated May 7, 2020. So in terms of the driveway operation, the trip generation projections, even at the highest end, indicate acceptable levels of service with limited queuing and no changes to the adjacent intersection operation. I think the parking, which is the concern of the board and consultants, has been discussed by Jason, and again in our report, we have a number that is currently proposed on the site, 170 spaces, and any mix of tenants with varying ordinance parking requirements would be subject to not exceeding the number of spaces that are provided on the site plan.
Yeah, let's start with Frank.
Betsy, also, we'll give you the board the benefit testimony regarding the site access, circulation, and the rest. You focus essentially on.
Oh, yeah, right. I guess there were some comments about the circulation, and I know Jason has provided the circulation to show the different vehicle types, the trucks that might be circulating through the site. The two-way circulation aisles surrounding the buildings are 30 feet in width, which is an over-design. Typically you have 24 or 25 feet, but recognizing that there might be some trucks and achieving the appropriate circulation, the 30 foot's been used on both sides of the buildings. On the southerly side of the buildings, there are overhead doors and another 30 feet of maneuvering area outside of that 30-foot aisle, so that if there are any larger vehicles, they can maneuver and unload outside of the two-way circulation aisle. And Jason, I think, took you through the change of the access so that we have the ingress on the north side of the site and an egress driveway on the south side of the site.
Frank, you're unmuted.
Yes, go ahead. Questions from the board, Mr. Chairman?
Sure. Does any board member have any questions? Do you have to unmute them, Eileen?
Yes, just give me 1 second, please.
Sure.
They should all be unmuted now.
Any questions from the board for the traffic expert, Betsy?
I have a few questions. Hi, Betsy. How you doing? I'll start off. Thank you for the supplemental report with the capacity analysis and the level of service analysis. I take no exceptions to the same. I think you've shown, based on, potential build out with the more intensive uses and related to the number of trips that could be generated, that the level of service at the access points should be efficient and acceptable, and even with limited impact on the traffic. The counts are 4 years old, but I understand the circumstances you're dealing with. I think there's even some wiggle room if those counts were to increase a little bit, the existing condition counts, that the level of service will still be acceptable. What I was concerned about was the circulation, especially with trailers, because the circulation plan does show that entering and exiting tractor trailer would need to basically almost fully locate itself in the opposite lane of traffic entering and exiting in order to make the movement. Whether or not tractor trailers will be using this site. I'm concerned about even with the loading operations, not only but the loading operations of the tractor trailer. Because the plan shows the need for the tractor and trailer to kind of parallel park along the rear of the larger footprint area buildings. There's not enough maneuvering space to have them perpendicular, a loading formation to the overhead doors. I just want to be, if you had a chance to look into that, and if you can address that.
I think there may have been some testimony at a prior hearing about the anticipated nature of the user. I have, and I'm sure your office has too, reviewed and studied a lot of warehouse applications that are very popular right now. This is certainly not designed for a typical warehousing operation. I wouldn't expect there to be any substantial amount of tractor-trailer activity at this use. It's not typical dock setup. It's overhead doors. So Jason has shown in his site plan that the maneuvering required to accommodate the trailer, but in my view, and I believe the applicant's view, we're not expecting this to be a heavy tractor-trailer generator.
So if the site plan is set up right now kind of like a warehouse with some office space, and the parking is demonstrated that the warehouse and office use is sufficient, but the loading and circulation for tractor trailers is not sufficient. I guess what kind of uses would be used in these large warehouse spaces?
I think there may have been testimony from the applicant at the last meeting about more like contractor type users who would have smaller trucks and maybe storing things, or partially putting things together, some like manufacturing or parts manufacturing, as opposed to a heavy duty warehousing where we're going to have pallets of goods stored where it's really not designed for that. It's designed more for smaller users.
Okay. I mean, my if there's somehow to kind of, I'm concerned about tractor trailers, being unlimited and unconditioned or uncontrolled going into it at a site and a user coming in that could have a significant number of tractor trailers and trying to just make it work based on the plan now. So I don't know if that's something that could be considered with the board. And, with the parking, we talked about it. I guess it's still some question mark on, how we make sure that the parking is sufficient based on whatever use is eventually determined to go in there.
Right, and how that exactly is worked out, I know from the applicant's side, we would have to prepare a parking calculation to show that the mix of uses would comply with the amount of spaces. But how that exactly is worked out legally or by the board is for a few other folks on this meeting to figure out.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Could I ask, Frank, would you mind if I jump in and talk a little bit about the tractor trailer?
No, please do.
Jim, I just wanted to come full circle on that. Betsy's right. There was a bunch of testimony at the last hearing given by me. I know you weren't there, so I just want to give you the benefit of the history of that testimony. When this site plan was initially put together, the applicant was not expecting any truck traffic. And through the iterations of design, I kept pushing to allow for loading from tractor trailers, and they kept telling me this is not the type of development that's going to get tractor trailers. It's not what they want. At the very end, just before submitting, I, for better or worse, ended up convincing them that we should find a way to allow for tractor trailers to get in there. So what we did is we compromised. What they're expecting and what they want to see at this site, like Betsy said, is smaller trucks, contractors, that type of thing, box trucks that'll back up to those overhead doors. And we have adequate space there for them to back up perpendicular and still leave that 30-foot access aisle there. If for some reason somebody gets a rare tractor trailer delivery, we've indicated on the plans that they're able to do that. I know it's not traditional, but they are able to do that. And to your point, if a user comes along that's expecting a whole bunch of tractor trailer traffic, I think what's going to happen is it's going to police itself. Those users aren't going to want to come to this site. The developer, the applicant, has put this thing together to discourage that. So I hope that helps assuage that concern.
I understand. I just thought the whole site plan process was so not to have to rely on individual owners and users and whatever to police themselves, and that the use and the site plan could be designed and planned together accordingly, so we know that, there's limited risk for failure. Understanding, there's always going to be a need for self-policing, but, there's still some need for, making sure it's, fail-safe, so.
Yeah, and the other thing too, I think you hit on the same point we talked about last time, because I seem to recall, we pointed out right around this time that the applicant intends to occupy space here, quite a bit, as a matter of fact. That's the intention now. So the owner occupant will be there, and if there are conflicts with tenants or whatever, he's there to address it.
No, I understand. I feel like the site is set up for like the smaller unit, a little bit of a storage room, warehouse type thing. I don't know if a 42,500 square foot one unit fits that kind of individual typical flex type tenant. It's a little, it's kind of being told it's a warehouse office, but it's going to be all these individual units. But the site plan is kind of one way, and there's a lot of unknown. And and if one truck has to parallel park behind the rear of the building and starts blocking out those tenants, the township gets a complaint. But I understand what you're trying to accomplish. It's the proper mechanism to ensure that happens correctly is I think we just need to be sure. Sorry. Thanks.
Thanks.
Jim, if I could ask you a question, are you satisfied that the accommodations that have been made on the site for articulated for tractor trailers, are they sufficient?
I mean, I'm concerned about the ability for tractor trailers to enter the site. If it's one tractor trailer, rarely, that happens where they have to cross a double yellow line. But if it's a use that requires a significant number of tractor trailers and it's going to be happening daily, I would be concerned about the adequacy of the driveways. The right turn in is the full length of a tractor trailer on the opposite lane. The exiting is, there is some partial encroachment happens. Again, if that's rare, to over-design it just for, a rare occasion is probably not necessary, but, it depends on the use, the frequency, and make sure it's acceptable. And the same thing goes with the loading. We're going to have a tractor trailer loading there, multiple times a day, multiple trailers during a week, that the site doesn't work for that. Once in a while, once a month, once every few weeks, yeah, it can parallel park behind the building. We'll make it work. Assuming the tenants aren't going to need to get access to their individual units. Depends on how the individual units are broken out and divided. So, I don't want to be kind of conclusive, but it's having not, there's a lot of unknown with not knowing the specific tenant at this time.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Ms. Dolan?
Frank, let me jump in as acting chair. I think let me preamble by first saying that I know I could speak for this board when we say the last thing we want to do is not see a successful business. And I understand your desire to create this property with all the uses that are permitted in the SED. And I think what you're hearing, Frank, from the testimony, not only from our expert, but even from Jason, is that there's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of variables that could affect this site, even with circulation, because you don't know what you're going to be putting in. And I think there needs to be some kind of compromise of what we're going to say, because you are asking for final, preliminary and final. I think we got to narrow this down a little bit more, or I think the right thing to do for the town would be go preliminary and then find out what your uses are going to be. So I want to find a compromise, and I'll leave that to you where the compromise can be.
Are you suggesting that the board grant the preliminary that we requested to withhold the final on the first phase?
So I think the final for the first phase, do you know who is the tenant going to be, the applicant, or you still don't know what that's going to be?
Yeah, the applicant is occupied big building in the front. If need be, he's been sworn at the last meeting, and he's on and can provide that testimony himself.
I'll leave that to Ron, but I take your word. If that's the testimony that was on the record, we have the record.
Yeah. Okay.
So Mr. Ackes, clear then. The warehouse and flex building that is part of phase one is going to have the same occupier in both of them, and the flex building is related to the warehouse?
Yes, why don't I do this, Ron? Let me call Gary Smith, who is the owner, and let him describe.
Gary, you're unmuted.
Hello, everyone. How are you?
In phase one, that it's, you know, both the flex building and the warehouse, it's going to be the same user, then I think that satisfies what, you know, Chairman Castro was saying.
Well, I am going to take building 4, the whole building.
And just clear, building 4 is the building that was in phase 1?
No, it's in all the way in the back of the property. I have a tenant for building 3, which is basically the same business that I have. They bend, break metal, you know, aluminum. They have brakes and shears. And then the building I'm in now, we don't know what we're going to do with yet. And then the front building is going to be split up to whoever needs it. Now, I'm in now. We have maybe possibly 2 trailers come in a month. And the trailers have no problem getting in, getting out, getting onto the roads at all. So as far as the tractor trailers go, you know, I don't know what building 3, how many tractor trailers they have, but I would think not many, 1 or 2. Now in the other meeting, I know Jason talked about the tractor trailers coming around the back to the back entrance of South Road and backing right up to the buildings and still leaving the 30-foot for people to get by. So if there is a tractor trailer that has to come in, that's where they could go. We unload our tractor trailers within 10-15 minutes, the 2 of them. And that's what they expect for the whole project.
So I apologize. Just again, in phase 1, it's the warehouse, and you've identified building numbers. What building number is in phase 1?
Building number 1 is in phase 1.
Okay,
right.
And what's going to happen with building number 1?
That's going to be split up to whoever we can get in there.
All right, so then it's not in phase 1 that you're going to be occupying both.
No, I'm going to get building 4, which is all the way in the back. Building 2 is the one I occupy right now. And then 3 and 4 are in the back of the property, which is phase 2.
Mr. Smith, if I may, I think, I don't know if you heard all the testimony. One of the concerns we're raising, you know how the site operates now, you being there as a user. The concern, at least I have, is with building 1, being in phase 1, and not knowing what the tenant is going to be, can cause a problem for the tractor trailers. I'll give you an example. If a tenant was to come in there and was a gymnasium, the traffic is going to be a lot different coming in and out. There's going to be a lot more people, you know, going in and out. That could hamper the operation of the tractor trailer coming in.
Absolutely. I plan on the front building, you're going to be split up into 5,000 square foot units. The gymnasium's not coming in there. There's a gymnasium next door with the ice rink, and behind that with a baseball academy. But I want to leave it open because there are a lot of small teaching, you know, athletics. You know, as far as maybe a golf thing or same thing with the medical. You know, it's pretty broad that it says it could be a hospital or whatever. But, you know, you put in small emergency care in it is a lot different than having a hospital in there. I'm not looking to get one tenant for the front. You know, I already have one tenant for myself and one tenant for building 3, but I'd rather split it up into smaller units so that way it's a little easier to deal with. You know, I don't want to put all my eggs in a basket either. So, but I don't want to tell myself that, if you want to limit my gymnasium to 5,000 square feet, I don't have a problem with that. You limit my hospital to 5,000 square feet, I don't have a problem with that. You want to limit my bank to 5,000 square feet, I don't have a problem with that. Those are all permitted uses, but, I don't take a bank taking the whole thing. I don't take a gymnasium taking the whole thing. And my problem is, I can't get tenants until I put the building up and people see it. So I'm not going to know who's coming in. But again, I think everybody who comes in has to go to the board to get approval to come in. So then if that the parking does it.
So, Mr. Accusano, if that's the representation, that the anticipation is any new use to have back, I mean, could we do this, grant, with regard to phase one, grant preliminary and final concerning, the warehouse building, and just preliminary with regard to the other building, and when the tenants are coming in, or when you've identified them, you come back for final. If you're telling me that you're coming back no matter what, it would seem that might be to resolve it.
If I may, Mr. Chairman and Ron, thank you very much. Can I suggest just 2 or 3 minute break? Let me call Gary and speak with him about this, and let me come back to the board. Can we do that?
I'm fine with that, Frank.
Okay, just give us a couple of minutes. Gary, I'm going to, okay?
Gonna call me? Okay.
Can we take a break then and meet back at 9:30?
That's fine.
Yeah, that's fine. That's all I, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the board's going to take a short recess. We'll be back at 9:30.
We're ready. Okay, Frank, you're back up.
Mr. Accusano, are you there? Mr. Accusano's unmuted, but he's not responding.
Well, I don't think we can proceed without him.
We're sending him a text.
Please do.
Eileen, I'm on the phone with Frank right now. He can hear, but he can't be heard for some reason.
Re-sign in.
Or should he re-sign in, he's asking. Oh, you're muted, Eileen.
Hey, Eileen, Laura needs to speak also, so when we get back, she needs to be unmuted.
Okay, so that's what I'm gonna do.
Okay, so he's gonna do that right now. Yeah, that was my speakerphone. Another way to do it.
Okay, can you hear me now? How about?
Yes, Frank, you're on.
All right, at long last, okay. But I spoke with my client, and we want to suggest this in order to get over the hurdle of what the users are going to be. If the board would entertain our proposal to give us preliminary site plan approval overall, but final approval only for the back two buildings, because we have the users identified there. They're going to be my client, who's light industrial, and the other building is going to be light industrial. Leave final for the front building alone until we actually have a user. We can come back to you, tell you what it is, and then we can make a decision. But at least you'll know the back two buildings will work. You have testimonies to what they're going to be. And I'll ask Gary to confirm that. I see that he's...
Yes. Very good. Can we just unmute Laura? I just want to make sure that the phasing plan is adjusted.
Thank you. So I don't have an issue with what was represented, but that's not consistent with what's shown on the plan. So the back building was always shown in phase 2, the front building was always shown in phase 1. And the other thing I just want to clarify, because it remains pertinent, is just as a condition of approval, we need to make sure that the site distance issue at the exit drive is also depicted on the for the preliminary and final. But the phase plan would need to be revised.
Yeah, Jay, that's for Jay Fitzner, that shouldn't be a problem. We'll be happy to provide it, give you the information that you need, and that solves the immediate problem. Jay, any problem with that?
So just to be clear that for the buildings that are getting preliminary and final, one of them is the warehouse and the other one is light industrial?
It's the two buildings to the rear of the plan, Ron. I think they're building 3 and 4. 4 will be occupied by my client, and he's light industrial, light assembly. And the other building he has a tenant for, and that will also be a similar use, same thing.
Light industrial. So both of those buildings, light industrial?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm assuming the final would also include the building that's already there. I mean, we're focusing on this new building, so I just want to make sure we understand.
Building, Mr. Acasano said buildings number 3 and 4.
That's correct, but there's an existing building which is number 2. I suppose if we're going to amend the phasing plan, we should put that in there as well, because it's going to remain.
Well, what building number 2 is the warehouse?
Building number 2 is where Mr. Smith conducts his business currently, and if that's going to be used for anything, Gary, I'd ask you to confirm. It will once again be for light manufacturing or a similar use.
Yeah, we'll come to the board with whatever goes in there.
All 3 of those buildings are light industrial, and there's a single user for building 2, a single user for building 3, and an anticipated single user for building 4?
That is correct. Then building 1 is giving us all the trouble. We ask only preliminary for that, and then when we get a tenant or tenants and come in for final, we can address all of the issues that the board has just raised.
I think Mr. Smith was going to say something. I didn't hear him about building number 2.
Well, building number 2 is the one I'm in, and I don't know what we're going to do with it yet. You know, we're worried about getting into our new building. One of the reasons we had this phased was because we weren't into the sewer septic area. And since this has taken us a year to get to this point, we already got into the sewer service area, so we don't have to phase it anymore. That was the whole reason for phasing it 9 months ago when we first started this plan.
I understand. I understand your business model. I do appreciate it. But building 2, you still do not know what your tenant will be.
Building 2, I'm not sure, yes. I'm not sure.
How big is that building?
What's that?
How big is that building?
It's 12,000 square feet.
Why don't we make, Gary, I'm asking this on the record, if this is not acceptable, simply state so. Why don't we put building 2 preliminary approval, but make that as a part of the phase with the building in the front?
Yeah, but we're in that building now.
That's not going to change. You're not going to get thrown out.
It wouldn't matter? Okay.
Please, it will not have final approval for any other user. In other words, when you get a user for the building that you're in right now, in a phasing plan, you come in for final.
Yes.
Is that the...
Are we all on the same page?
Yeah, you're going to continue to use the building until the new building is built. But once you vacate, it will essentially become like building 1. It will not have final approval because we don't have a user yet. It doesn't hurt you.
That's
but it's
fine.
Very good. Ron, you have that all clear?
So let me understand this. So preliminary and final for buildings 3 and 4, which will both be used for light industrial single user. Building 2 will continue in its current operation, but have preliminary approval for the future. But when it's known what that future is going to be, they're going to come back for final, and there's no user for building 1, so that gets preliminary, and when something happens there, you're going to come back for final as well.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
Can we get a consensus from the board that they're okay with that, Eileen?
And just before you do that, Before you do that, Eileen, I just want to circle back to, are you proposing then to construct all of the parking, or the parking that's associated with 3 and 4 right now, and then present the parking plan, you know, when you come back for final on those other 2?
I'd pose that question to Jason. How is this going to work now if we're going to basically flip-flop?
Well, I guess there's a couple of ways we can handle it. I think what Ron is driving at is we would calculate the parking requirement based on the uses previously cited and propose to build those. And then when we come back in the future, we would adjust the parking requirement at that time.
All right, and can we amend plans to reflect that, because you're going to amend them in order to show the new phasing?
Of course.
Okay.
That's reasonable to me. I just want to get consensus from the board. Yes, ma'am.
I guess I just have one question for clarification on the parking, for Frank and Ron. I guess if we're doing preliminary for the whole site, and we've identified what we're doing preliminary and final for. So when we talk about preliminary for the whole site, it's the 170 spaces that we're proposing, but we're only going to build what we need when we need them. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I mean, you can depict everything, but show that, you know, what has the preliminary and final will be constructed now versus what has preliminary and will be revisited, essentially, you know, when you come back for final.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, the board members are all unmuted.
Okay, so you just want to get a consensus, instead of everybody stepping on one another, we'll just go individually, Eileen?
That would be perfect. Do you want me to call the roll?
Please.
Okay, if everybody understands, we're talking about the phasing plan. Mr. Bozovic, do you have any objections?
No, I have no objections.
Thank you. Mr. Dorado?
No objection.
Chief Kudrick? I can't hear the chief. Hold on.
He's giving thumbs up.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Seaman?
No objections. I think the facial plan makes sense.
Thank you. Mr. Everett?
No objection.
And Chairman Nicastro?
Yes,
Okay.
I agree. Thank you. Laura, is there anything else that we got to go over to the report?
No, as long as the engineer agrees to comply, I have no issue. And I believe he previously testified that he agreed to comply with our comments, to the extent they apply to the phasing.
Agreed.
And Ron, you're good with everything?
Yes.
Frank, you have no other testimony you want to give, do you? Counsel?
Hold on 1 second. He's not unmuted.
Okay.
Yeah, I have one more. Are there any questions regarding architecture? I have Mr. Scalise who's prepared to testify. If the board wants that testimony, I'll be happy to present it. Your call.
Laura, was there any objection to anything? Can you unmute Laura, please?
One second.
She's still muted.
Who do you need, Laura?
I need Laura.
Yeah, unmute. 1 second. Go ahead.
So, no, Mr. Chairman, as you may recall, the architect testified last time, and my issue was that we did not see those exhibits. We have now had the opportunity to review those, as well as providing some awning areas to break up the facade. So I do not have anything additional. And I don't know that unless the board members want to, we need to hear from the architect again.
So just, Laura, to be clear, is relief required from 228C now, or they remedied that?
I believe they have released it, however, they provide additional here.
Okay.
Frank, if Laura's depiction is accurate, then I don't think we need your testimony from your architect.
Yes, okay, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Scalise is here, I want the record to reflect that. I'd also like the record to reflect that I wore a shirt and tie.
But we can't see you, Frank.
Only one facade of building 4 that did not comply, that is identified in our report, and we didn't have an issue with that.
Okay.
All right, Mr. Chairman, at this stage, if the board wants to hear the architect, should put public.
Yes, we'll do that. We'll open it to the public. If there's anybody on the line that wants to make comment on this application, please identify yourself.
If anybody has any questions or comments regarding this application, now is your opportunity to call in if you have questions. We'll give you a few seconds because there is a little delay.
Eileen, seeing nobody calling in, I'm going to close it to the public.
Okay.
So Frank, if that concludes your testimony, then I need a, if any board has any question, now's the time. Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Just to be clear, Mr. Chairman, if it's in the affirmative, it would be a motion to grant preliminary and final to the newly revised Phase 1, preliminary to the newly revised Phase 2, all ancillary variance and design waiver relief.
Sounds good. Can I get a motion, please?
I'll make a motion to grant everything that Ron just said.
The easy way, Chief.
Yep, absolutely.
Can I have a second, please?
I'll second the rest.
Who was that just seconded?
I did. Or Everett.
David Everett.
Thank you, Dave. Roll call. Mr. Bozovic?
Yes.
Mr. Dorado?
Yes.
Chief Kudrick?
Yes.
Mr. Seaman?
Yes.
Mr. Everett? Did he say yes?
Yes.
Thank you. And Chairman Nicastro?
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you,
I
everyone.
just want to thank the applicant. Listen, we're in some uncharted times. This was a unique meeting to have. Little hiccups, but I think it went well overall. So with that, everybody have a good night. Stay safe. Chief, thank you people for what they're doing every day for us. And
Yeah, thank you.
And,
Thank you to all the board members too, and I'll be sending out next week's agenda shortly.
Fun times. And Mr.
Do this
Smith,
again.
best of luck to your business.
Yes, good luck. Good night.
Why don't we try Zoom next time?
Do we need a motion to close?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, a motion to adjourn?
Please.
Second.
I think we should go into executive just for the fun of it.
Eileen, I think you got a first and a second. All in favor?
Aye. Aye. Aye.
Good night, everyone.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.